All right, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready to move on. All right. What do we do on a constant daily basis? Around school, around work, around anywhere you're surrounded by people, even if you're by yourself. You observe things with your eyes. You can observe things, but you can watch things, and there's a difference. Observing is actually paying attention to see what's going on. You're trying to figure something out. And you can observe a lot by watching, and that's the quote I chose. You can observe a lot just by watching people's reactions to things. And I believe that that has a big, big impact on a lot of our lives. Number one, you guys are all observing me up here giving a speech about what it takes to listen and just watch people, and hopefully it sinks in a little bit. A bigger problem I would say about observing things would be our television and mass media, simply because in Europe they're more free about sexual and sort of loving sort of things over there, about, you know, like censorship. And over here it's more about guns, and we shoot people, but we can't show any nudity usually unless it's rated R, which I think has a lot to do with our culture. We observe people walking through the schools all the time, but do you really watch? Do you really see the pain that we all have inside, that we really bury and put our poker face on? No, and that's what I think is the difference. You can observe something, but you could also just see it. And the last thing I would say about my topic would be that you just gotta try to observe other people as much as you can. And try to learn. Don't just watch. Try to learn from their mistakes, if they make any. Heaven forbid. We all do. But don't just watch it and say, oh, I'll never do that. Observe it. See the consequences of whatever actions that brought, and try to learn from it. Because in the end, you wouldn't want to make that mistake. And it's one of the most important senses that we have, is our eyes. Without our eyes, I mean, you can't see color. You can't see people. You can't see people's expressions, especially when you're talking to somebody. There's a lot of nonverbal communication going on. And if you don't observe it, you won't understand it. So in conclusion, I believe that you can observe a lot more things versus watching them.
Nope, don't put it back. That's your souvenir for the day.
Nice.
I'll be out in the hallway autographing them for $5 a shot after class.
Let's hear the instructors.
Give me a moment.
These are
All right, Manny. The rhetorical question at the beginning's okay. I thought the lead into the topic was pretty solid. You had a good idea that there's a difference between observing and watching, and I like that. I thought I was going to get a little bit more of that, and it just feels like you had that idea, but you didn't do much with it, and there's not really a plan as you go into the speech. Now, you find a lot of things to talk about. The problem is that sometimes they sound like they're a half thought out idea, that there needs to be some point to it. So you introduce an idea, mention it, give a little bit of description, but don't tell us how it relates to the subject. That whole thing about the mass media, for instance, and Europe versus the United States, there's probably a point there someplace, but it just comes up and it's never really connected very clearly to your theme. And then the rest of the time, it really feels like you're wandering around on the subject. You find an idea, you trail it down for a few seconds, and then you find another idea and you follow it. So there's not a plan. You've got some interesting ideas that come up, but they don't develop much, and they aren't always fit into the goal that you'd set up for yourself. Delivery issues, you got several things that are pretty solid. I think there's good variety in your tone. I think you've got some good gestures and indicators while you're speaking. Your facial expressions could be a little bit more vivid at times. Your eye contact, I thought for the most part, you're looking up, but there were a few times when it felt like you're looking over us instead of at us. I don't know that that was consistent, but I did notice it a couple of times. So I do appreciate your making the eye contact with the audience, and maybe a little bit more engagement would be helpful. The one thing about the presentation that I think is obvious, and when you watch it back, it's going to seem obvious, and that's the pacing. It really feels like you were going through the presentation slowly and deliberately. If we were checking the rate at which you were talking, it feels different. It feels like you are, instead of the 150 words a minute that most people are talking about, it's about 80. Not, it just feels like you're thinking as you're talking, and it's coming out in your voice as you're doing it. It just, the rate feels way too deliberate. I'm not saying that you have to race through the presentation, but it felt a little lethargic. It wasn't terrible.
It was for some dramatic effect.
Yeah, but it does feel like there's something off about the presentation as a consequence. That was the one thing that was noticeable. All right, we got to stop there.